for joining me again this week on the Ground with River Valley Co-op. Today's a special day. It's my first ever two guests, and I'm pretty excited about it. I got with me a Winfield United agronomist, Mr. Jason Hagley. Jason, how you doing?
Good.
And a River Valley Co-op agronomy account manager, Jimmy Doherty. Jimmy, how you doing?
Good, good.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about nitrogen stabilizers. And I know before we started recording the video, you guys were talking about, the wet weather. Jason, will you touch a little bit on how the wet weather that we've been experiencing is going to affect nitrogen?
Yeah, absolutely. So you think about the spring that we've had. It's been wet and cool, eastern Iowa, western Illinois. And first of all, we think about where nitrogen comes from in the soil. It's from the organic matter. That process relies on bacteria in the soil. So when it's cool and wet, it doesn't work as well. And then the fertilizer that we apply, also we lose some through leaching. So that's when that water starts to drain from the soil. Nitrate isn't able to be held in the soil. It drains downward and it's lost. So wet weather is kind of a twofold impact on nitrogen availability. Not as much release from organic matter, and then greater loss through leaching when we get a lot of rainfall.
So Jimmy, hearing those thoughts, what are you talking to your customers about right now, looking into the future based off the wet weather we've had?
So basically, most of our customers were looking at a complete nitrogen package, and what we're talking about to cover some of the loss is either a planned side dress with a broadcast urea, or we're looking at how do we add a little extra on there to go ahead and cover what's lost. And with that, we're really stressing using a product called PinitMax, which helps keep that urea from volatilizing off and gives the grower a really, really good benefit to protect all of their nitrogen investment as we go out there and broadcast that.
So PinitMax is a nitrogen stabilizer. Jason, can you explain a little bit on, how does that nitrogen stabilizer work to keep that product from moving?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing we've got to realize is what urea is made out of. Urea is ammonia and carbon dioxide hooked together, and when we apply that to the soil, we rely on an enzyme called urease to break it down, making that ammonia available to the plant, available to the processes in the soil that make it available to the plant. But when we apply that urea too close to the soil surface, when it's warm and moist, and that urease enzyme breaks down the urea, we have the potential to lose ammonia to the atmosphere. It's lost and is never going to be available to the plant. So when we use a stabilizer like PinitMax, we're preventing that urease enzyme from breaking down the urea, allowing it time to get incorporated into the soil where it can go through the natural conversion process and become available to the plant.
Yep, makes sense. Before we started, you guys were talking a little bit about sulfur and how, the wet weather that we've got so far is going to impact sulfur availability in the plant. Jimmy, do you want to touch a little bit on that?
Sure. So sulfur is a key building block in all your protein synthesis. And basically, a plant needs sulfur or sulfate to produce a single amino acid that makes the complete protein chain. So typically, we like to get out at about a 10-to-1 nitrogen to sulfur ratio. The nice thing with running dry urea is we can also mix some AMS in with that. It spreads very evenly, does a great job of coating the soil surface so that we can get some sulfur back in those plants and prevent that loss. It also makes it so that we get a much higher protein content in that plant, which is going to in turn out to higher test weight and higher yield in that corn plant.
Right. And the good thing about, like we were talking earlier with using their urea and the AMS is we can broadcast that and, put more nitrogen where you put more plants and, get that double bang for your buck there.
Yep. Yeah, it gives us, with the dry urea application, we have a much, much better flexibility on any of our variable rate applications. We're probably as a company running at about 60 to 70% variable rate applications now on our side dress, and we can do those based on our modeling tools, on planting prescriptions, or pretty much any kind of variable that we want to factor in and create a variable rate planting or variable rate side dress prescription. And the nice thing with that is it does give us extreme flexibility and a really great tool to increase yield in a profitable manner.
Yep, no doubt. Jason, do you have any other comments that you'd like, all of our growers to know?
Yeah. So just building on the conversation about sulfur, going back to what I said earlier about the weather, if we're not applying sulfur regularly as fertilizer, the only place that the crop is going to get sulfur from is from the organic matter. And we have cool, wet soils. We're not getting as great a release of that sulfur from the organic matter. and it becomes important to think about how we can give that to the crop through some of our side dress or top dress applications. And then the other thing that I would mention is that when we have these years with lots of nitrogen loss, cool, wet springs, the crop is going to be even more dependent on the fertilizer that we apply, and protecting it using the appropriate type of nitrogen stabilizer becomes even more important. It's a relatively small investment needed to make the most out of that nitrogen fertilizer that we're applying to the corn crop at those key times that it needs it to start developing that year.
Yep, no doubt. Well, guys, I really enjoyed it today. I learned a lot. I hope our growers out there and everyone watching becomes a little more informed about what we're doing here. I enjoyed it. I'm glad to have you on today.
Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you.
See y'all next time.